to do it. Now, the no questions asked part is very hard for most of us. But when we have a problem with that, it shows a lack of trust on our part that God always has our best in mind. God doesn't mind our questions, but the fewer the objections, the fewer the questions, the greater trust we show. Papa God hopes that we'll eventually trust Him enough to do everything that He tells us without question, even radical things. Now, to those of us who are parents, don't we wish our children, regardless of how old they are or how young they are, don't we wish they'd just trust us enough to take our advice and put it into practice without questions, without back talk, without balking at it? Now, if we would like that, how much more do you think God would like that of us? So Jesus told the servants to fill the jars with water. They were used to taking orders, so maybe this seemed a normal thing to them. But Jesus was not their slave owner. His family visited frequently, but the servants knew them and trusted them. And his mother, who they also trusted, had told them earlier to do what he told them. Then Jesus did what I think they probably had a little bit of trouble with. He told them to draw out some and take it to the MC of the feast. Now tell me at least one of them didn't think, we're out of wine, not water. But they did what Jesus told them to do anyway. Keep that thought in mind. That's a central thing of this, the central theme of this whole event. They did what Jesus told them to do anyway. There's a big lesson in that for us. Remember, God would like us to do whatever He asks us without question. Did the servants do what Jesus asked them to do without question? Mm-hmm. Apparently so. Let's go to verse 9. Now when the chief servant tasted the water, after it had become wine, he did not know where it came from, although the servants who had drawn the water knew. He called the groom and told him, everyone sets out the fine wine first, and then after people have drunk freely, the inferior. But you have kept the fine wine until now. Now the toastmaster of this wedding tasted this water and had a startling discovery. It was now wine. He knew they were out of wine. Where had this stuff come from? And it was excellent wine. So good, he called the bridegroom aside and chided him, what are you doing? Everybody serves the good stuff first, and later, after people are a little bit loopy and don't care, then they serve the cheap stuff. But you kept the good stuff till now. What's the matter with you? I imagine that was one very confused bridegroom. He didn't have a hidden stash. Or did he? He was probably thinking, wouldn't I remember it if I had had a stash hidden away? Think! And let's finish our reading this morning with verse 11. Jesus performed this first sign in Cana of Galilee. He displayed His glory, and His disciples believed in Him. Now that sounds so matter of fact. It's easy just to let that just slip right over our heads. But this was the first of the signs that Jesus did to show who He was. It unveiled who He was to His followers, and His followers believed He was Messiah from that day forth. Now let's backtrack a minute. The key to this whole moment was when Jesus told these household servants to draw water and take it to the one in charge of the reception. Those household slaves knew water wasn't appropriate at a wedding. They knew the toastmaster or the master of ceremonies would not consider it acceptable. And they knew that if he tasted water, they would get the brunt of his displeasure. They were not Mary's servants, nor were they Jesus' servants, but they did what Jesus told them anyway. They weren't doing this to be kind. Jesus had probably proven himself to be kind and never cruel over the years as they had contact with him. And they probably thought, no, not Jesus. He'd never do anything to use us cruelly. No, he wouldn't. Let's go. This will be all right. Not understanding what he was asking, they obeyed. Knowing there was a risk that they were being played, they obeyed anyway. They were not forced to obey, they chose to obey, trusting neither Jesus nor his mother would purposely do something to humiliate them or harm them. And were they ever rewarded? Now, what happened because they obeyed, even though they didn't understand how it was going to turn out in the end? Number one, the groom's family was saved a tremendous humiliation. God showed the groom's family that he cared. Two, the celebration continued with just a minor interruption. Three, the servants believed Jesus was the Messiah because they knew what they'd put into those big clay pots. And it wasn't wine. Four, those early followers of Jesus that we call disciples or apostles, they were convinced he was the Messiah. Now, up to this point, they hoped he was the Messiah. Now, they knew. All those things happened because some socially insignificant nothing servants obeyed the voice of Jesus and did what he said, even though they had a suspicion it might turn out bad for them. Miracles will only happen when you step out in faith and obey, even when it seems silly to do so. The German theologian Paul Tillich once said, "Faith is a leap in the dark." Sometimes with God, in our spiritual walk, there's no plank going across the hole. And to get across to the other side, you just have to leap and trust God that you're going to land safely on the other side. But I've never seen a miracle in my life, you complain? Now you know why. You haven't obeyed in the small things. You haven't done what you know God wants you to do, especially when it didn't make sense. So if you don't trust him, why should God waste a miracle on you? When King Saul disobeyed God and made sacrifices when it was not his place to, the prophet Samuel declared, "To obey is better than sacrifice." Saul lost everything because he did not trust God. Compare that with his successor, the relatively small-framed, red-haired, baby-faced lad named David. He was incensed by a giant's insults of his God, and he took a step of faith to defend the honor of his God. We know the end of that story. It was the end of Goliath. So what do we learn from this entertaining event that was in Jesus' life?